All right, we're ready for chapter 20 out of George Washington Saxe. No! Hooter screamed. Gustav! Gustav! He cried, sinking to the ground. The rebels stood staring with puzzled looks. They raised their muskets. So we're dealing with some Tory spies, are we? A ragged soldier said, pointing his gun at Hooter. No, we're patriots, Matt cried out. But the rebels looked on wary as Hooter knelt crying beside Gustav. If you're patriots, what are you doing with the likes of this scum? A soldier asked, motioning to the slain Hessian. We were his prisoners, Matt tried to explain. He captured us in the woods back there, and my little sister walked onto the river and almost fell through the ice. He saved her life, and we were just grateful, that's all. We're patriots, we really are. Patriots grateful to the enemy? What double talk would this be? The corporal muttered. Sounds like Tory double talk to me, another rebel replied. He began to frisk the boys, digging into their pockets, but stopped when he came to a crumpled dollar bill in Tony's pocket. He handed it to one of the other rebels, and the soldiers gathered around to inspect it. Look, it's got a picture of the general on it, the skinny corporal said, turning the bill over. The United States of America, he read, but it be a strange color paper. The private frowned. And not like any continental currency I've ever seen. Matt shut his eyes tightly. What would the men do if they noticed the date on the bill? It could be false currency that the redcoats provided their spies in the event that they're captured, another soldier suggested. Yes, that's likely, the corporal replied. We'll just have to leave it to the captain to decide. He should be bringing down the regiment by now. We're not spies, I tell you we're not, Matt tried once more to explain. Save your breath, a dirty-looking soldier said, pointing his musket at Matt's heart. It's up to the captain to decide, and if he decides that you're runners, you'll probably rot the rest of your days in jail, along with the other turncoats. Turncoats would be another way of describing a traitor, somebody who spies and gives information to the enemy. But we're only kids. My sister is only 7 years old. There's no one to look after her, Matt said, pulling Katie to him. The two little ones will be given good homes, good patriot homes, the soldier told him, looking at Katie and then Tony. It was the first time in his life that Tony was actually glad to be so small. He brought his thumb up to his mouth and began to suck on it, just in case he didn't look young enough. He took it out, though, on seeing Matt frown in his direction. Don't worry, said the corporal. The little ones will be raised to be patriots, free patriots. But Matt was worried. They had come so close to finding their way back home, and now they were suddenly closer to spending the rest of their lives shut up in some prison. The hardest part for Matt to swallow was that it wasn't the enemy who would be responsible. He and the rest of the club stood watching as one of the rebel soldiers roughly pulled off Gustav's tall black hat and put it on his own head. The other men laughed and hooted, and as the soldier pranced around with the hat tilted on his head and a smirk on his face. Matt suddenly felt sick to his stomach. He hated to see them acting so badly, for these were his rebels. They were the special brave men that he had always dreamed about, and suddenly they seemed neither special nor brave. Matt looked away, unable to watch anymore, as the soldiers laughed and made fun of the dead man. It was as if Gustav had never been a person. Matt turned his head, and he suddenly noticed that one of the soldiers who was watching the spectacle had a small leather pouch tied on his belt. As Matt looked on, he saw the soldier untie the little leather bag and empty it out into his hand. I'll wager you'd get a smile from your wife if you'd be bringing these home, the soldier said to a stout corporal standing beside him. Matt's mouth dropped open when he saw the handful of blue beads. "Where did you get these from, Gabe?" the other corporal asked, looking over at the beads. "I found them in the snow on the march back," the soldier answered. "A small price for the little beauties, and a small price the little beauties are yours." And for a small price, the little beauties are yours. Matt was about to call him when the soldier holding the beads suddenly looked up. "Here's the regiment now," he said, nodding toward the woods. Matt and the others turned to see the larger group of soldiers making their way to the shore. Matt didn't want to take his eyes off those beads and quickly turned back to watch the soldier drop them back into the pouch and tie it onto his belt. Soon the shoreline began to fill up with troops. Matt knew that after their success in Trenton, the rebels must have been feeling victorious, despite the exhausted look on their faces. If only Israel hadn't gotten sick, Matt thought, we would have been walking out of the woods together right now. His eyes filled with tears as he stood watching. "What do we have here?" a familiar voice suddenly boomed. Matt wiped the tears away from his eyes in time to see Captain Macaulay standing before him. "Runners, Captain." "Look like runners to me, anyway," one of the soldiers replied. "Found them with this Hessian," he said, pointing to Gustav's body. The captain looked over the trembling members of the adventure club and suddenly focused on Matt. "Captain, it's me," Matt sputtered. "Remember, I was bringing the general his cape." A look of vague recognition came over the captain's face. He turned to spit in the snow just as General Washington walked up behind him. His spittle landed inches from the general's boots. "Your Excellency, I beg your pardon, sir. I didn't see you approaching," the captain stammered. "It's of little concern," the general said. He walked over to Matt. "So it was you who was responsible for returning my cloak?" he asked. Matt was awestruck. He didn't know what to say. He didn't even know if he could get any words out. Yes, sir," he managed to croak. "It was a bitter night," the general said solemnly, "but the morning was as sweet as any I've known." He looked out over the river, his eyelids heavy with lack of sleep. Matt knew he was talking about the victory at Trenton. Suddenly, the general noticed Katie and motioned for her to come to him. "Well, well, my little lady," the general whispered as he knelt with Katie on his knee. "You seem to have gotten your feet wet once again." Katie nodded and stuck her thumb into her mouth. "There's a little girl just about your age waiting for me back at Mount Vernon," he told her. Katie smiled on hearing this. "And do you know," the general continued, that little girl clucks over me just as much as Mrs. Washington. Yes, and whenever I have to be away from home, that little lady insists on my taking an extra pair of stockings." He winked at Katie as he pulled a pair of woolen socks from his overcoat pocket and gave them to her. Then he put her down and motioned for Matt to come forward. He held out his large hand for Matt to shake. "I thank you, sir, for the return of my cloak. It was no night to be without it, and if I can ever be of service to you, please call on me," the general said. "No, sir. Yes, sir. I mean, thank you, sir," Matt stammered. Then he had an idea. General, sir, if it wouldn't be too much to ask, could I speak to you alone for a minute?" The general seemed preoccupied as he stood watching the troops file down to the shore. His eyes were red and teary, and his face looked haggard with exhaustion, yet the exhilaration of victory seemed to give him a renewed energy. He still had much to oversee. "A minute is all I have time for," the general said, motioning for Matt to come closer. Make it fast, lad. What be your concern?" he asked, placing a hand on Matt's shoulder. The two of them turned away from the others. It took all of Matt's courage to begin, but once he did, he found that it was easy to talk to the great man. Matt told him all about Israel and Abby and the beads, When he had finished, he looked up to see a grieved look on the general's face. "This war has taken so many," the general said in a low voice. "My heart is sickened with the sight of it, and yet I find myself called upon to lead them through this misery." The general's voice trailed off, and there was a long silence. Matt didn't know what to say. Finally, the general spoke. "Our victory today has brought us that much closer to the place we all long for and the freedom we seek. Your friend will not be forgotten. I will personally see that Miss Abigail Gates receives her beads. Don't worry." Then he turned and walked over to his aide who had been waiting for him. Matt watched as the aide approached the soldier with the beads. After a few words to him, the soldier handed over the pouch. Matt backed away, glaring at the other soldiers who had been ready to throw him in prison, but the soldiers were too embarrassed to meet his gaze. Soon the shoreline was bustling with activity as the victorious but exhausted troops poured in, ready to be ferried back across the river. The club members watched as a group of Hessian prisoners were being led to the shore. Captain McCowley came up beside them. The general has ordered your return passage across the river," he said. "You're to wait here until a boat is available. Now, mind you, you're under my charge until you leave this shore, so don't be wandering off now." Without another word, he turned and disappeared back into the crowd of soldiers. "Let's find a place we can sit down," Matt said, walking over to a big log. The rest of the club members turned and followed him, all except Hooter, who had gone back to Gustav's body. Matt walked over to him and placed his hand on Hooter's shoulder. "He was good, you know, Matt." Hooter's voice had broken into a sob. "I don't care what they say. He was good." "Yeah, I know," Matt whispered. "I don't understand it," Hooter said, looking up to Matt. "Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? It's not like on TV where you can always tell." "No, it's not," Matt said softly. "I thought this was supposed to be one of the good wars. The rebels were supposed to be the good guys, and maybe there's no such thing as just good guys fighting bad guys. It seems like there's good and bad on both sides. And you know, the funny thing is that sometimes they're really fighting for the same things. My friend Israel, I don't think that he was all that different from Gustav except for the uniform. Maybe if it weren't for the different uniforms, they could have been friends instead of ending up like this." Both boys stood staring down at the fallen soldier. Gustav was lying on his stomach, with half his face in the snow and the other half turned toward them. The one eye that they could see was open, and as Matt knelt down beside him, he looked into that clear blue eye. He knew that he would never forget its unblinking stare, the cold, unyielding stare of death. He thought about how warm and full of life Gustav's eyes had been just minutes earlier, and he thought of Gustav's good-natured voice laughing. "Das Katie! Yeah, das Katie!" Matt felt the tears running down his face as his trembling fingers touched the frozen snow crystals that were forming on the dead soldier's eyelashes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry that I didn't thank you for saving my sister's life." "I hate war," Hooter cried, his voice choked with pain. "Me too," Matt whispered, closing Gustav's eye. "Me too." And that's the end of the chapter.